For a family who is seeking a diagnosis or an assessment for autism, the first step is that concerns are raised, and that might be by parents themselves or by a professional that they happen to be involved with, like a childcare worker or a maternal child health nurse. So someone raises concern and then refers on to a formal assessment for autism. What's considered sort of best standard is to have 2 or 3 different professionals assess the child, and that usually includes a psychologist, a speech pathologist and a paediatrician. The DSM is kind of like a guidebook that professionals use to diagnose a whole range of disorders and difficulties.
The DSM-4 are the old criteria that we used to use for diagnosing autism, and the DSM-5 are the new criteria that we use for diagnosing autism spectrum disorder. So with the DSM-4, autism spectrum disorders used to be under 3 categories. So we had autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. With the new DSM-5, however, we now only have one autism spectrum disorder category, so that we don't have these 3 different types. So with the old DSM-4, we had social areas that we looked at, communication deficits and the presence of repetitive or stereotype behaviours. With the new DSM-5, social communication behaviours are actually under just one category now, and we also still have the repetitive behaviours along with sensory behaviours that have actually been added into the DSM-5 as well. What we found was that the reliability of a diagnosis of high-functioning autism versus autistic disorder versus Asperger's disorder was not reliable in the long term. So that a child that was diagnosed with Asperger's disorder when he or she was very young, actually when they grew up looked quite similar to a child that was diagnosed with high-functioning autism, for example. So now we've actually collapsed all the categories together and are diagnosing children with just autism spectrum disorder with different levels of severity or different levels of support, rather than having these 3 different categories that often confused professionals, confused parents as to where children actually fell. For parents, the process is very similar to what it was previously. But what we are finding is that with the new criteria, they are a little more stringent than the previous criteria. And the reason for that is because with the previous criteria, you only needed to tick a certain amount of boxes in the social area, in the communication area, and in the repetitive and stereotyped area. But currently you actually need to tick all boxes in the social communication area and a few in the repetitive area to receive a diagnosis. Previously, some children that would have received a diagnosis of pervasive developmental disorder, for example, will now perhaps not meet criteria for autism spectrum disorder and will instead receive a diagnosis of social communication disorder.
In a lot of cases, it can be not clear, and there are a lot of children out there who have some signs of autism and have some of those difficulties, but also have some strengths that don't look quite like enough to call autism. And those cases are unclear, and it is a spectrum. So there are actually a lot of children like that. Particularly for those children, it's important to have more than one person making the call and doing the assessment. And that's why it's considered best practice to involve preferably 3 different clinicians who have slightly different backgrounds, slightly different knowledge base, and can look at that criteria and all those borderline skills and together make a decision.
My feelings from diagnosis to now would have to probably start with some of those feelings of grief, where you feel a lot of sadness for what your child may not achieve, because it is, once you hear your child has whatever it may be, you do instantly sort of think, so what does the future hold? Because you're just hearing what they've got, but you're not able to stop in that moment, because it's a pretty scary, overwhelming thing just in that very moment.
In the beginning, going from anger and just shock. Where do you start? What do we do? How could this happen to us? Why us? Why us? Why me? I remember times of just being very cross and wanting a big pity party. I wanted everybody to feel sorry for us.
For me, when she was little, we just survived. We just worked out how to help her, and nothing ever fazed us. We just plodded along, and that's my theory, plod along.
You do go through this strange mourning of and grieving of well, is this child ever going to do this? And then, you come to the realisation where you go, well, you know what, whatever he achieves, don't put that pressure on him. Don't put that pressure on yourself.
Once you move past those first few days, I guess, and start to do a bit more research, there's a lot of relief because you can see that it doesn't mean the end of something, it's just the beginning of something new. Once you have that diagnosis, there's, over time, I guess, a gradual understanding of why they react in certain situations, and you start to learn skills to either avoid those situations because you know that it's just not going to be helpful, or you can start to learn to put things in place to make those situations more pleasant for everybody. Initially, I was always worried about what people thought of my kids, and I worried that they judged my parenting because the kids couldn't sit still and they did cry a lot and they struggled to mix in social situations.
There have been people on our journey who have made us feel very unwelcome, and it's been very challenging, and who you've had to kind of distance yourself from, or even strangers who will say comments. Strangers who will just make a comment about your child and they've got no idea. But then there's been others who just get it, and we've had angels just come out of nowhere who've just come and supported us and helped us, who just, we've been so lucky and so blessed. It's very strange.
It's who you are. People that know Beth and accept her autism are the ones that help her flourish, are the ones that are happy when she writes a word, are the ones that are happy when she does something really nicely, or just happy to be with her.
Trying to correct everybody is very challenging sometimes because not everybody really understands the condition. So I think they want to approach you and try to talk about it, but they talk to you about something that they'd seen on I saw this on Rain Man. Is Campbell, a savant? And it's like, well, not every autistic child is going to be a savant. They're not like that. It's all those misconceptions that, you have to try to get people to really understand what autism actually really looks like, and it is different for every single child.
As the kids have got older and they've had a lot of therapy and done a lot of work to learn how to manage those interactions and they've got better at it, I can see that people can see the difference.